Jep, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my pleasure to be here, Allan. Jep Hill, Executive Creative Director at Alkemy X.
I got to comment on the title just because it's kind of funny. The further up you get, the bigger the titles get before they get out of hand. What's that been like, kind of moving more into an executive role at Alkemy X?
It's interesting. I think it's, you kind of have more insight to the non-artistic part, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. But really, it's all about team building, and I think hopefully it's having more in the conversation on the higher levels, especially now. It's a challenging market with all of the different, I'll say it, strikes going on and work kind of pausing, and how we continue to navigate that and stay nimble. And again, it's still the creative direction, looking over that, but also again, having more of an ear and a seat into budget. And it's almost like the Peter principle. You start getting involved in stuff you never meant to get involved in, I'm grateful for it. It's really cool. It's really fun. And doing a chief creative officer position at another, one of my companies. And so that's also fun as well. And ultimately, it starts being like, you get what the words mean, but you put them together. And to your point, what does that really mean?
I had one title at Activision, which I requested not having, which was special effects art guru. And yeah, it's just like, can I not be called that, please? But apparently it was, set in stone. So with operations, is that something that you tend to gravitate towards? Because I find a lot of artists, like it's interesting or fascinating to to want to know about the stuff, but as soon as they get exposed to it, it's just like, yeah, I'll get out of the spreadsheets and go back to the box, please. So
yeah, a bit of the deer in the headlights, right? I mean, honestly, one of the reasons that signed up for the artistic roles, because I'm not only interested but distracted by bright and shiny objects, contrasty colors, things of that nature. And some of the department heads I work with, it's clear they have production genetics within them, very, very organized. They have the larger vision for planning and things like that. And I leverage that, because I realize, hey, I think I might be organized. And then I see that and you're like, whoa, okay, awesome. Well, how can we use this? How can we put it together? And again, it's kind of like maybe a manager. And I mean, when I say a manager, I'm thinking of like football, soccer, or a coach in terms of, hey, leveraging the strengths here and there to see how it makes it an easy lift for everyone. Pulleys, levers, all that stuff. Work smarter, not harder. Let the machines do the work. So in terms of spreadsheets and things of that nature, admittedly, Allan, I'm usually not putting them together. I am, data points, things like that, action items, things that we need to talk about, next steps. But there are other people that are very good at it on the team that help to keep track of all that, even to the point of, some people in the C-suite are, back 2 years ago, well, right here, you said this. And I'm like, oh, you captured what I said, but you didn't capture the context. So what it really meant, you got to be careful with the stenographers around. But yeah, I think it really means helping to have a larger voice in the overall creative planning and process for the 30, 60, 90 or near, mid, and long term, and being able to build on that game plan from a creative aspect. It's really not as much of a spreadsheets and Excel docs, which are the same thing, but it's not as much that is making sure that we're covered on the creative arm of the company.
I think most of my career I've been very fascinated by both pipeline and the business side. So I mean, a lot more about how to make things work better. At least from my career, it was always kind of, whenever I go to a studio, I was always looking at, oh, okay, these guys tend to lean more on automation. Is that better for them or worse? And there's obviously a lot of benefits to it, but it also means you tend to move a lot slower. And then you go like Blur Studio back in like early 2000. I've said this to Tim plenty of times, like, this company shouldn't exist because of how it's ran. It's just, you're pretty much just wheeling over with a floppy disk and saying, here's the asset. Because everyone was senior, it meant everyone was more self-contained and it just worked really fluid. So there's all these different variables at play. I think looking at like what works, what doesn't work, it means that you can kind of figure out what to pocket and, over time build up like, okay, like this seems to be the recipe that tends to work best. For you kind of growing up working in this industry and seeing the industry mature into what it is, what's that been like to kind of culminate a lot of that experience and apply it now where you're at?
Because there was no VFX when I got into school and things of that nature, people are asking often asking you to do something that not a lot of people have done or have seen do. So if you're figuring it out as you go along, as long as you get it done, that's great. And then as you continue the process and you learn, and kind of like you're saying, I know that this might be a brute force way to do something, but I know there's a shortcut if we call this artist and go about it with this way and use this process, and pretty soon you inadvertently kind of created a pipeline for something or a workflow, and then you're able to run same as processes through that and things of that nature. So I think it's all about kind of finding a way and finding how to get it done, and then trimming the clay as you go. And then pretty soon down the road, somebody makes a comment of like, wow, you all are really optimized and really fast. And you're thinking, really? I hadn't noticed. We just kind of were walking on the tightrope and not looking down and really kind of enjoying, bringing this person to help with this, bringing that person to help with that. That's part of creating, the joy of creating some of these effects that have, never been done before or not seen, or maybe creating a new way to do an old thing. Or, I'm very familiar with the sneaker net and, file on a thumb drive. And sometimes, depending on the team, that's the fastest way. And I know pipeline people everywhere, their heads just exploded, but I'm a huge fan of elegant process, a huge fan. And I'm also a huge fan of, Automagic. But there are times where things can be overly pipelined and you need a little bit of insight in there to make sure that it's fine tuned. So it's a delicate balance, otherwise, that's why we'd never be replaced by AI or anything of that nature. It's about skillful execution and decision making.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I guess just to touch on that, because I can't not, like when you bring up AI, like what are your thoughts around that? Because I have a lot of opinions that oddly have changed as things matured. But yeah, I'm kind of curious for you, like just observing how things are changing and new tech coming in. I don't know, like what are your thoughts on AI as it currently stands?
It's interesting. There's several different fields, as you know. From a creative direction standpoint, or putting together a deck and creating imagery or rapidly concepting something that doesn't need to be iterated upon. It's very cool. You can come up with some amazing things, but as soon as you get notes and you start needing to iterate upon something, that's where you really have to, it's just a lot of times at this point, it's quicker to go in and do what you need to do with the artistry. And again, back in the days of the optical printers and things of that nature, people talked about digital visual effects, and they're like, it just is just that's going to replace us. Well, yes, digital did kind of replace analog in that way. But again, AI is a tool that you can leverage it if it's set up properly in an iterative way, but it's not something currently that's going to replace, again, the skillful execution and knowledge base of the artist, because it's that iterative and refinement that a lot of times it's kind of a black box. So you're not able to go in and just kind of nail down and hone a shot quickly. So again, for concepting, things of that nature, you can come up with some really cool stuff, but to repeat it, refine it, you can still leverage AI, but it's not AI itself. So it's not going to replace the skillful execution and the knowledge. It's training on existing data. And it's always making inferences for the most part. There are different models. So the experts in those could say, well, actually in this other way. So I am speaking in broad terms, but in terms of its application in visual effects, we can definitely leverage it. We can definitely use it to repeat existing things. We're using it to output sequences in the time that it used to take to output shots, but it's not standalone. Mm-hmm. And it takes a skillful team of artists to set up the process by which that's done. And that is something that's not going to change. So it's really about how you use the tool. And I mean, I always say the same stuff. So it's kind of like an axe. It can be really effective, or if you use it wrong, it can get really messy and really bad really quick.
Wise words. Hopefully there's no stenographer to say, well, you said this was going to only get messy. But I think you're absolutely right. Like that, I do think that over time, things are going to very shortly, continue to mature. And I was very surprised because I used to think, it's just a tool. It's like turning global illumination on. Every lighting artist would be like, well, I'm out of a job now. It's like, I'm still hiring a lighting artist. I do think that it won't really affect VFX for a few years. And that's not because AI isn't rapidly growing at a fast rate. It's because VFX as a machine doesn't really move as quick. But I do think it's still a machine. And end of the day, like, you're going to be creating tools around it. It will become predictable because we'll, build tools that give us what we need to do. But, we're already using, training for nuke and things like that are useful, but it's not replacing us.
That's another arrow in the quiver. It's not something that you can just turn it loose and do its own thing. It has to be set up correctly, but it is fun. And in the right hands, it is very powerful, but it's not something I think some people are feeling it's going to replace us. And for really great artists, there's no, I don't see it doing that. I see it supporting. And you've probably heard me say this. For me, technology is like framework. We build it out more, and it allows us to do new and wonderful things. It's not just technology for the sake of technology. We still climb up on that scaffolding and create the mural and the art higher up the wall.
Cool. I like that. Do you have any kind of go-to things that you tend to, at this point in your career, just kind of, it's muscle memory, like rinse and repeat, in terms of starting a new project, building confidence with the client immediately by the first things out the door being stuff that's going to blow them away, or little things to manage clients or keep the team motivated and moving forward? I'm just kind of curious for you, like, what's your typical playbook as a supervisor?
For me, it's about really maintaining the production value, telling the story. One of the things that kind of blows clients away is when I mention, hey, maybe this shot shouldn't be visual effects. Maybe we can shoot this practically, Maybe there's ways to really save that budget. And something else that is pretty standard, and I think most people do this, so it's not some secret sauce, is to partner earlier in production to help plan the shots, the shot design, the composition, how the approach, really make the most of their budget while trying to keep as many options open as late in the process as possible, just to really make the most of what they're doing and kind of unlock that feeling of artistic and creative collaboration along with the skillful execution. You might find that sometimes a director has an idea, or producer or showrunner or whomever has an idea about something, and through the discussion, you both come out with something greater than you went in, and I didn't even realize we could do that. I didn't know that we can do that? Sure. If we do it like this or we do it like that. And it's not always the case. Sometimes it's might beyond the scope of the project or something, but being able to really kind of have that collaborative, the creative partnership to build upon and refine and really let their ideas flourish. So that's one thing. And then in terms of internally, it's always, something that just little details and things of that nature that a lot of times places don't even realize it, just prohibit the image quality and kind of lock the image into a lower level of quality. So we do things that I'm very particular about for imaging, from an imaging standpoint, to really always be able to have the highest possible quality. And sometimes the client doesn't realize it, and there are no points for coming down on somebody that doesn't know something. It's more about facilitating it underneath. And I learned that it's like the concept that there's cookies on every shelf. And some clients are only looking for cookies on this shelf. But when we deliver, we make sure there's cookies on other shelves, just in case somebody comes by and they're like, ooh, we have cookies on this shelf. So everybody looks for something different. So it's about really hitting that mark of delivering the highest possible quality. And it doesn't mean a client gives notes and they approve the shot and we go do a bunch of extra work. There's no points for that. My point is that the process supports a higher level of quality. And when they approve the creative and we tech the shot, it's quickly executed and we move on.
I like that. And yeah, you're right. It's pretty important to do the hand holding and give options where needed, so that way they feel like they're not boxed into, well, we got to go with this approach. You kind of touched on this a little bit, like with clients, like if there's ever a director who doesn't have as much faith in visual effects, let's say, just in terms of that relationship, navigate that whole conversation of trying to get them to understand that the visual effects they saw were the ones that mightn't have been as polished as they should have been, and that's why they're maybe hating on that versus the stuff that they don't actually realize that they're seeing.
You know, it's not uncommon to work with some directors that will insist there's no visual effects in their film and it's all in camera. That's fine. I get that. What we do is often on the test, if there's a test or something of that nature, the first task or two, as always, we really execute to make it, those are generally invisible effects that we're speaking of. We really work to make it invisible, and we really work to have an integration that is such that the director is, oh, okay, all right, this might work out, or I'm seeing that this does work here. And I'm talking down to retiming eye blinks, which is something that we've done on a recent film.
Would you consider that a fluid morph?
What's that?
Would you consider that a fluid morph, or?
Well, we don't use an Avid, but zing. I'm kidding. Yeah,
no,
it's based off of fluid. I mean, I was picking up off your joke that yes, it's based on a fluid morph from the Avid side, and it's always funny, you know. And I know you get this back, you know, going forever. Well, can you make the retime look as good as the Avid? Yep.
There's a movie I'm on right now where a few shots landed on our plate that are fluid morphs, and I was like, isn't that going to land in editorial? Like, I was just kind of surprised that actually landed at a VFX facility, but I'll take it.
And it has gotten better, fluid morphs. I mean, you know, back when they were Verispeeds, you know, but it has gotten better. However, there are still things that we have done that were fluid morphs, to your exact point, on this film with the director that does not like visual effects at all. And we more facilitated, you know, what was in camera. So really nailing down, not even kidding, eye blinks and the timing of this and several other things in the shot. Oddly enough, psychology shows that somebody that questions or maybe not be a fan of yours from the get-go or the process from the get-go, that then changes their mind, as opposed to somebody who was always a fan, it's actually the person that wasn't necessarily a fan from the beginning. Once they change their mind, that is a stronger relationship and there's more trust there.
There's a term called Epiphany Bridge, which is presenting someone with the information so that way they can come to that conclusion themselves. And when they're the one coming to that conclusion, it anchors stronger for them rather than telling them and convincing them. It's about kind of, I wouldn't say manipulating, but architecting them to come to that conclusion, so that way they hold on to it because it was their summary. It goes beyond show don't tell. It's actually for them to come to that conclusion themselves, and that way they really hold on to it a lot more.
It's like a psychological anchor, to your point. It really and it helps cement that trust and that relationship. So yeah, I mean that's generally it. And truth be told, Allan, we do the same thing with people that do like visual effects, because we really want it to be an elegant process and really have it be something that people aren't looking at in their project.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, you do what you do because you're passionate, and it's not about, you know, it's more about helping the client open their mind a little bit to all the options they have, not ram it down their throat or manipulate anyone. It's just, this is how you do a good presentation and get people won over.
Exactly.
I figured it'd be fun just to go a bit more in depth on some of the stuff that you have done in the past, because you have worked on a lot of amazing stuff. I was curious if there's any project that ever really stood out to you specifically that you always hold on to, just as something you're really proud of, or that was like a fun or challenging experience at the time.
Yeah, there's several, actually. right off the top of my head, Spider-Man Homecoming
Mhm.
was an amazing opportunity at that point at Digital Domain. That was right at the advent of ASUS, and
I knew we'd get in the color flow. Here we are.
well, this is a quick thing, right? Everybody's like, well, we knew this was coming. Working with the team there, it's just absolutely fantastic. But really setting up an intuitive workflow. So I had the opportunity to hop in and set up a what you see is what you get ASUS CG workflow for every single department across the project. So whether it's matte painting, texture painting, obviously compositing, rendering, and just make it so it presented, what you see is what you get, and not some, oh, let me throw this on and I have to put this back in the old, put this film on my monitor, put this ND filter or what have you, and setting that up and facilitating that workflow in the pipeline. It worked and Marvel was happy. And so that was incredibly fun and rewarding as well, because I draw a lot of satisfaction for setting up these elegant processes that allow artists to just focus on being artists, not having to know the techie underbits. Happy to discuss that, whatever, at the water cooler or when appropriate, but really about just facilitating a workflow that leads to a higher quality product and happy clients, that keep them coming back. So that was one. What else can I say? Really enjoyed Jungle Cruise at ILM. Just worked with some great people there. Just some of the top soups at that company. I had an opportunity to work with John Knoll, really just side by side, but being able to sit there and talk tech with him about some of his projects that he would do at home in the garage and stuff like that. And I got the sense that maybe not a lot of people would come up with the questions and stuff I had. So he would kind of get a smile and talk to me about this stuff, and helping them dial in their ICT pipeline. And, that was amazing. You and I talked about Hollow Man. That was a while back, working with the minds over at ImageWorks. We had a full-on plate reconstruction pipeline that was based off tech I'd never seen before. I mean, got some really smart people there. And I was on set for that. So that was really interesting in terms of, telling them where to put the markers on Kevin Bacon and things of that nature. And then how do we do these invisible effects? How do we track this? How do we show bed depressions or impressions or both? What's the right way to see this? And that was an incredibly large, talented team coming up with these kind of things. And playing a part of, in terms of doing the on-set data and doing the theodolite survey equipment, and just really had the opportunity to learn so much there. All great experiences. And of course, we talked about Armageddon, one of my favorite, and just the model shop team and the pranks they would pull. Probably not best talked about another time, but just everybody having so much fun. And I'm not going to skip the fact that we just had wonderful Nerf gun wars, and Nerf bombs, and, the time of day, which it's like everybody would stop what they're doing and just get into a Nerf melee. We had so much fun creating these things. Mighty Joe Young, that was another one, working, Rick Baker, holy smokes, right? And the FUR system and coming up with that. And that was happening in parallel, at the same time that Armageddon was happening. And I was very fortunate to be able to hop between the two and work on both. And just being able to work with these iconic figures and, again, learn from them. And there was always, what was really impressed upon me and impressive, it's just zero ego from some of the top people. And just, you're just sitting there enjoying what you're doing as you're executing. And it almost felt like, I've said this many a time, like you're at a jam session, or you're doing your thing, and they're, oh, that's really cool how you did that. And you're like, hey, I liked how you did that other thing. Can you show me more? Oh, sure. And it is still like that these days, but the processes are so much more, I don't want to say set in stone. They're definitely more refined. So that's why, circling back to AI and having influx of new technology and different ways to leverage it, there's a lot of fun to be had there. and really piquing the interest of super creative minds of how to put these types of things together.
I was chatting with Tim Miller. I mentioned Blur earlier, but I was chatting with him a few months back, just catching up, and that was something that both of us were thinking about. Because for me, like getting into VFX, like I started out in '93, started working in '96, and yeah, I mean, for me, like I kind of wonder if that was just like the magical time, because like Mighty Joe Young, all that, like Todd Vazari had VFX HQ, and there was VFX Pro. There was a few like really amazing websites. So for me, especially in Australia, I was just like obsessed about the stuff, because that was the one thing I was always jealous about, was being in Australia. It meant that like the industry, especially then, was LA, and it meant that I'm outside the bubble. You know, I just got to observe rather than I want to go work on this stuff. That's something that I kind of wonder about. Like, is it just because we've been doing it for so long that it's still an exciting industry, but like there was just something about like the late '90s, especially, whether it is just perception that like this is magical for those people getting into it now, or there's just, it's so much the norm. It isn't this thing that no one really knows. Like if you say even VFX, a lot of people say special effects. Just a lot of stuff just back then was the Wild West. It wasn't standardized yet. You know, do you feel like for a lot of people now it is still magical that you can do all this in Unreal and this, or whether it's kind of like it is exciting, but it's just, it's, you know, it's normal now for everyone. It's been out there for so long.
Yeah, that's a great question. I got in around the same time, and I know exactly what you mean. You know, recall working on the project Deep Rising.
I was a huge fan of that movie. It was a fun, wild ride with some cool visual effects.
Yeah, it definitely was. And that's where I really got into tracking. And I actually, got a mention in Cinefex. And I was like, this is great. Am I going to get mentioned in Cinefex every time? No. But I think, to your point, as we were all figuring things out back then, and you're saying like really coming together and figuring out oh wow, this is so great, and the websites and that kind of piquing the interest. You know, now there are many college classes on the process of things that you and I probably helped set the path or lay the path and the foundation for. And I think it you mentioned Unreal and Unity and things of that, and more of like the GPU aspect. And I think that there are always opportunities for it to refine and bring in new things. However, I feel that what you're mentioning was really kind of starting at the ground floor, or maybe I should say the genesis of digital. So there was so much that we didn't know that as we started piecing these things together, people all over would kind of, take that, build on that, take that, build on that. Now you have wonderful opportunities with things like Blender and Houdini and Maya that have a lot of the soup starter, if you will, kind of like give you already a foundation, which then leads to, this is a whole nother conversation, but that then leads to a whole bunch of people that click the button but don't understand what's happening behind it. I feel you're the same way. We gravitate toward the people that are happy to click the button but really know what's happening behind it, and they probably have a little special sauce script that they run and make their own button that actually does a few more things.
They're the ones who make the button.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just nostalgia, but I'm always kind of getting my head back into the early days, just because it was like, I actually caught up with my old boss. I randomly bumped into him at the VES Awards. The guy who was trying to hire me at 16, I didn't want to move across country at the time, so it took a few years, but I finally worked there when I was 18, and we're reminiscing about like the dream team that we had back then. And it's one of those things of like, there's been a few times in my career where you just worked with like the best of the best, and you had like the band, and the band broke up and they all went off and started their own bands, and they're all so successful. And it is like one of those things of like, was it that time, or do I just look at it subjectively of like, that was awesome, and that interest and passion was the reason? Like, it wasn't a class in school that they could sign up for. It's like you had to seek it out. So I think in a lot of ways, like, it kind of attracted all those underground people to get together and do this thing they're passionate about.
That's a really great point. I mean, what you just said, because you really had to work for it. It wasn't something that, oh, go this path. No. And I think a lot of people gave each other just a subtle nod for like, hey, you're here. You found your way here. Okay. You know, it wasn't, oh, you went through this. And not that schools are bad. I'm not saying that at all. In no way. It's just when there wasn't really that industry, but you found that people had still kind of come together with a bit of a common knowledge base, and each one with a little bit different special skill. It was very much different than, oh, we all went through this, we matriculated through this particular college or what have you. So I think you're right. And maybe it's a little rosy colored glasses, but no, some of the people that I worked with and that time, I'm with you. I feel there were several specific times that were just golden, magical moments and just amazing times to do this stuff. And I know there are going to be more. It's just within different contexts.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. I'm curious too, like you mentioned before about working on set for Hollow Man. When you guys were there, were you confident at the time of like, oh yeah, this is absolutely going to work? Like, no problem. Or is it like, I hope this fucking works? What was it like just for you guys kind of going in there, knowing that like Hollow Man was like a very technical, like again, Cinefex. I still remember Kevin Bacon with the plastic on his face, wide open mouth, lifting up the sunglasses was the Cinefex cover for that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what was that like for you? Like, did you think everyone kind of was going in there with a lot of confidence, or like, this is my best guess, we'll figure it out in post?
I was young enough at that time to probably be overly confident, and I didn't know enough not to be. I trusted the technology and the math that we were basing it on, and I give my VFX supervisor, Scott Anderson, at the time there, and he was, or is, very meticulous to say the least, but he really appreciated the process to which I was bringing. So he really looked to me to kind of inform, let's go about it like this, let's go about it like that. He got the whole, camera tracking and all that, but it was really about, A, how do we accurately track this character? B, how do we account for the fact for this character to be invisible? So there's a lot there, whether it was motion control, because that always works most of the time sometimes. And, but having those different processes come together, and there was a lot of existing knowledge that other people had the opportunity to debut there, and them coming together. So there were definite times afterwards that were like, well, this should work, but let's see. And as we fine-tuned it, but on set, aside from the antics, it was a Verhoeven film. So, I still remember the Krispy Kreme donuts at the 2 a.m. when the hot donut sign was on, and that we would just all break and do that. And also the really cool thing, because it was shot in Washington, D.C., and then back on the stages over at Sony or Columbia TriStar. But the set there was just amazing. So it was really great process. Of course, this, we immediately were doing tests early on with early data that we were getting back, sending back. And it really was about the accuracy. And I mean, as you know, data is king. The more you can get, we're happy to throw it out or filter it later, but the more you can give us up front, then we'll know what we need. Really the magic of the plate, the background reconstruction, the plate reconstruction, and the accuracy of the object tracking for the characters. And then we had probably, one of the best Houdini teams in the business at the time. And they would just take that and run with it and do all the kind of crazy chips and dips. So it was fantastic. There were some, I think, Allan, that certain shots are like, okay, this should work based on what we're seeing. But if I told you that I knew for a fact they would all work, I mean, there were times where like we were very optimistic, and there were a couple snags based on, we didn't get this information, or we have to manually do this. But as you know, the show must go on, and it worked out. We had a process. We had done our homework before then, and it was all about, with the system we had, making sure the data we collected was in line with what was needed. So that worked out really well. very fortunate.
And how's the process changed, do you think, from back then to now in terms of match move and camera tracking as well? Like, I kind of feel like in some ways it has matured, in other ways, like, given how much other areas have rapidly grown, I feel like that's where AI, I'm assuming, is probably going to play a bigger role. Like, I feel like it hasn't really changed that much. Like, I'm still getting people to stabilize a shot, and then we manually track over that, like, you know, every little trick and, you know, thing. But that movie in particular needed to have perfect match moves. It literally left nothing to the imagination.
At that point, it was all, you know, everything we rented was from J.L. Fisher. It was all 2048, 1556, you know, Academy, full app. So that was great. We knew the sensor size. We knew that was all standard. You didn't have to worry about things like crop factor. You didn't have to worry about the fact that how the sensor size impacts the depth of field. You didn't have to worry about, you know, effective focal length, because this director's used to looking at a Super 35, but we have, you know, some kind of 8K RE film back, and they want to know the equivalent focal length on, you know, what they're looking at. I have found people these days that treat everything and they track everything as a common sensor size, and then they wonder why their depth of field isn't right, or why it doesn't match what's actually in the plate. And I find that these days there is a bit of, or there can be a bit of, glossing over some of the important key factors in the optical equation that really make a huge difference. As you probably can tell, I'm very pedantic about these types of things, because that is what makes the difference in imaging. Sure. And it's a small little bit that can make such a world of difference and set you up on a great foundation. So sometimes, you know, you might send tracking out to a vendor, and I'll intentionally not include the sensor size because I want to see if they ask for it. Or something of that nature. Also, something that I'm sure you have thoughts on, is back then we didn't shoot without shooting a lens grid at different focus distances, because, you know, your distortion changes based on focus distance and, of course, focal length. Some companies, good on them, they still do rely on these lens grids, but a lot of them, you know, whatever. Fix it in post or DI or what.
I didn't know that. Like, I always just assumed everyone still, like, I spent like $500 at FedEx in Santa Monica printing out a massive fucking lens grid that I still have, because I was trying to fix the barrel distortion on an 8mm lens, which failed in the end. But I just assume everyone still uses lens grids everywhere, because it's the ground truth of what the hell your lens and film back are doing, in the sense of
lens grids and color charts. And not even, you know, there's a right way and a wrong way to even hold a color chart. And, you know, we don't have to get into that now. That's probably some other conversation, but, you know, it's about passing that information and sharing that information. And you know, hey, talk about a way to put a large room of people to sleep quickly. In certain shows, it wasn't even an option. You needed to do it. Kind of like you're doing you know, when you're doing your motion control, you have a reference object in there that you know the size, so you can lock it in or what have you, and a lot of those tricks. Now, technology does allow us to move past some of that, so you have better checks and balances that can come into play that can facilitate a faster workflow. I'm all for that. I mean, that's great. However, it's understanding, again, pushing the button. That's similar to pushing the button. You want to know why, what's behind it, to make sure you're covered 3 different ways, just in case things go wrong, because, you know, roadie rules, you know, to borrow from the music industry, you got one, you got none, right? If something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong in visual effects, right? So that's where it's about getting that reference data, and not a lot of people gloss over that. Now, it doesn't mean you need to shoot HDRs every single time, or it doesn't mean, like, a lot of people don't shoot texture photos anymore, or they wouldn't know to shoot texture photos with the long lens. With the polarized lens or what have you, and splitting it out and these kind of things. A lot of people, it's like, yeah, of course we do. We do that without even asking, but it's those kind of things.
Big highlights on fucking everything, but yeah.
yeah, but also it's knowing when you need it and when you don't. You know, knowing the rules to know when to not necessarily break them, but ignore them, and that kind of thing.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, what kind of shoot is this? Am I going to bring a giant Manfrotto tripod with a Nodal Ninja and massive DSLR, or just whip out a Theta and, you know, that'll do, because we're not doing car reflections or anything needs to be that sharp. Yeah, making the right decisions on the tools that you have rather than
Exactly.
the most painful process every single time. You mentioned ego for a second earlier, and knowing what you don't know is I think that's such an important thing, because I'm curious for your take on that in terms of, like, I honestly feel like it's usually the younger you are, the more ego you have to prove. The older that you are, the more that you've done all that, and you just want to work with non-assholes and everyone just to do great stuff together. It's, you've kind of put it to rest at some point. But more mature and experienced you get, the more that you do go into everything skeptical about, like, what can go wrong, not about like how do we get it right. It's about preventing or anticipating all the problems before they ever come up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and it's like the whole 4 stages, now getting into management speak, everybody tunes out. But I mean, it's kind of like playing golf. The first time you play, you don't know what you don't know. And then you start knowing what you don't know. And then, and you just keep on going on and how you manage that. And then you don't know what you know. And then you know what you know. What you just said is very interesting, because I've hit the same thing about, yes, I'm sure we can do this. And part of, I think, something that you and I might have in common that resonates is the fact that we talk the talk, but we walk the walk. And not everybody has been able to walk the walk. And so that is what, well, you sound overly confident, I'm not sure. But you know what? At the same time, it could be the person that has just come in that doesn't know what's possible, that suggests a way to do something that up to now has been impossible. So it's just about keeping that open mind, and you are right as well about kind of, yes, 1995 me was probably, very full of energy and going at it. And as you go, you just kind of more deep breaths and, hey, let's plan for this. Let's plan for that. I appreciate the enthusiasm all the same. I just kind of, I enjoy letting others have it and working through it with teams. And when you mentioned the Epiphany Bridge, and you work with teams, and when you see that light go on and people's out, and they're like, whoa, and then they come out with some entirely new skills that they didn't have coming in, and I do too, still learning, always here to share and learn. And that's what's really exciting, is being able to continue to learn and refine. I love it.
And you're right, naivete can be a secret weapon too. You always hear well, if I'd known what I know now, I would have never started that company. But at the same time, like, that ignorance of not knowing means not sunken cost fallacy, but it is like, at that point you've invested so much time that you continue with it, and then you get to see the benefits on the other side. So a lot of times, like, going in not knowing anything means that you are going to get yourself in deep and have to pull yourself out, rather than not even try in the first place. So it's pretty beneficial. You mentioned before about 4 rules of management. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? It
was a class that effectively, that when I was at ImageWorks and I started moving into management roles, really about skill-based management and how, we're not button pushers, and how to put the wind in the sails of talent to help them navigate to higher levels and learning more rather than kind of crushing it. And so, to somebody new that doesn't know what they don't know, direction feels like support, right? It very much feels like support. And so you might have a project and you let them know what you need done and how to do it. Or, you move on, and then you decide this person knows what they don't know. So let's talk about it, and then I'll let you know how to do it. And then you have another person that's maybe a stage 3, and meaning like they don't know what they know. So maybe we'll talk about it, and we both decide on how it's done a bit. Or maybe you decide how to do it and if that works. And then stage 4 is here, where you just let them tackle the problem and run with it. And that's where they know what they know. But really, ultimately, there's always more kind of things where opportunity for mentorship and sharing and passing that along. And I'm sure I got some of that wrong, but the general idea, I think, holds true.
I like that. Randomly, Beowulf, another Sony film. What was it like working with Zemeckis and working on that project? That was like 2006, I think.
Yeah, I think it's 2006, 2007. That was really interesting. I mean, we chatted a bit about Polar Express, so it was it was another performance capture thing. I mean, the way that that was done about that crew that did the on-set. And I remember, you'll appreciate this because, I mean, that's Robin Wright Penn and Angelina Jolie, right? So I think there was a day on set where Brad Pitt and Sean Penn were there. And so nobody could tell, no matter what everybody was just like, there's so many beautiful people here. What are It was an incredibly interesting process. We learned, we took a lot of what we learned from Polar Express, applied it, but it's different every time. Mm-hmm. And working with Zemeckis, the Oracle, as he's known, it's just a delight, an absolute delight. Watching those things come to life. And that was a bit of a fun process. I think I had the opportunity to, I found some bit about fast point ambient occlusion and color bounce, first color bounce in a GPU Gems book. And I worked with somebody to quickly prove it in Houdini. And Pixar's like, this will never work. And then we showed them, and then they wrapped it into RenderMan. So for me, that felt like, oh, this is awesome. So that was pretty cool. And we used that a bit on Beowulf. That was kind of a really cool achievement for me, impacting RenderMan, right? But yeah, it was a wonderful process. And again, the performance capture, not enough credit can go to the team in terms of how that was done and keeping all that data organized and refining it. And then the animators and knowing when to do what, what not to touch, what to touch. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those, I'll never forget it. It was really an amazing experience.
This has been awesome. I can't believe we already hit an hour. I feel like I got through like 2 questions, but I guess we got through a lot. Time flies when you're having fun. Yeah, this has been really awesome again to catch up. And hopefully we'll get a beer in person at some point, whenever the next big industry event is somewhere.
Or not, we can just make it happen. I look forward to it, Allan. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to catching up next time.